Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're diving into some pretty murky waters.
Oh, yeah.
Nesting and banking.
Definitely murky.
You've sent us some really fascinating sources on this.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly,
Yeah.
the more I read, the more it feels like a financial thriller.
It really does have that element of intrigue.
It does.
You see, unlike some straightforward financial crimes,
Yeah.
nesting isn't always about outright fraud.
Right.
It often lives in this gray area where institutions might be taking shortcuts
Okay.
or seeking a competitive edge without fully grasping the potential fallout.
That's what makes it so tricky. So
Yeah.
for our listener who might be unfamiliar,
Right.
let's start with the basics.
Sure.
What exactly is nesting?
Okay, so think of it like this.
Okay.
Imagine you have a company,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't want anyone to know you're behind it.
Right.
So you set up another company as a front,
Okay.
and all the transactions go through that clean company.
Yeah.
That's essentially what's happening in banking with nesting.
So one bank.
One bank is using another bank as a shield to hide its activities.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And why go through all that trouble?
Well, yeah.
What's the motivation behind nesting?
There are a few common scenarios.
Yeah.
Sometimes a bank might be located in a country with weaker financial regulations to access the global financial system.
Right.
They might nest within a bank in a more reputable jurisdiction.
So it's like they're trying to slip under the radar
Yeah,
by borrowing someone else's credibility.
precisely.
Okay.
And that's where the risk comes in.
Okay.
Because now, let's say that first bank is involved in some shady dealings,
Uh-huh.
money laundering, terrorist financing, you name it.
Right. And because they're hidden, it becomes nearly impossible to trace those funds back to the source.
Exactly.
Wow.
It creates a huge headache for regulators and compliance officers trying to maintain the integrity of the financial system.
Speaking of real-world examples,
Yeah.
one of the sources you sent mentioned something about correspondent banks. What are those?
Yeah.
And how do they fit into the nesting puzzle?
A correspondent bank is basically a bank that provides services to other banks,
Okay.
especially those in different countries.
Okay.
Think of it as a financial intermediary that facilitates international transactions.
So if a bank can't directly access the U.S. financial system,
Yeah.
they might use a correspondent bank as a gateway.
Right.
Okay.
And here's where nesting gets even more convoluted.
Oh, boy.
Our source gave the example of Bank Y,
Okay.
which operates in a high-risk country and can't open accounts with U.S. correspondent banks directly.
Got it.
So what do?
What do?
They open an account with Bank Z in a neighboring country
Okay.
that does have those connections.
So Bank Y funnels its transactions through Bank Z
Exact.
to get to those U.S. correspondent banks,
Mm-hmm.
and the U.S. banks are none the wiser.
Exactly.
Wow.
They think they're dealing with Bank Z's customer,
Right.
completely oblivious to the fact that Bank Y is the one pulling the strings. Oh my gosh. And it's not just limited to banks.
Okay.
The sources also highlighted how money service businesses or MSBs can get caught up in nesting schemes.
Those are companies that handle things like money transfers, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Imagine an MSB processing payments for its customers.
Okay.
It adds another layer of obfuscation, making it even harder to determine the true origin of the funds.
And this is where things get really interesting and, frankly, a bit scary.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Well, you see, while some instances of nesting might stem from negligence or a desire to skirt around regulations,
Right.
others are far more insidious.
Okay.
They could be linked to organized crime, sanctions evasion,
Wow.
or even funding for terrorist activities.
And because it's so difficult to untangle the web of transactions,
Yeah.
these illicit activities can go undetected for years.
Unfortunately, that's often the case.
That's unsettling.
And even if it's eventually discovered,
Yeah.
proving intent and holding the responsible parties accountable can be incredibly challenging.
So knowing all this,
Yeah.
what are we doing to combat nesting?
Well,
The sources mentioned that SWIFT,
mm-hmm.
the global financial messaging system, is trying to address the issue.
They are indeed.
Okay.
One of their key initiatives is something called Field 50 locking.
Okay.
It's a technical measure,
Uh-huh.
but it essentially prevents the manipulation of sender information in SWIFT messages.
So instead of being able to insert a fake name
Yeah.
or use a third party to disguise the true sender,
Right.
banks are forced to be more transparent about who's behind the transaction.
Precisely.
Okay.
Now, while this is a positive step,
Yeah.
some experts argue it's not a foolproof solution.
I see.
There's always the risk of finding ways to circumvent these safeguards.
It's a bit of a cat and mouse game then.
Yeah,
As soon as you put up one roadblock,
right.
someone's trying to find a way around it.
That's the reality of the financial world, unfortunately. Which is why the role of compliance officers within financial institutions is
Yes.
absolutely crucial.
So these are the folks on the front lines,
Yeah.
scrutinizing transactions and making sure everything is above board.
Yeah.
What kind of tools do they have at their disposal to tackle nesting?
Well, for starters,
Yeah.
they need to be incredibly diligent in reviewing their correspondent banking relationships.
Go.
Are they partnering with institutions in countries with strong regulatory frameworks?
Got it.
Are there any red flags that suggest a higher risk of nesting?
It's about doing your homework
Mm-hmm.
and not just taking things at face value.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that due diligence needs to extend to every transaction,
Okay.
especially those involving international transfers or
Mhm.
high-risk jurisdictions.
I imagine that involves poring over mountains of paperwork and data,
Yeah,
looking for any inconsistencies with
Yeah.
suspicious patterns.
that's part of it, yes.
Okay.
But it's also about understanding the nature of the transaction.
Mm,
Does it make sense in the context of the customer's business?
got it.
Is there a legitimate reason for the funds to be routed through multiple banks or countries?
So it's not just about ticking boxes.
Yeah.
It's about applying critical thinking and asking the right questions.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it's an ongoing process.
I see.
Compliance officers need to be constantly vigilant,
Mm-hmm.
monitoring transactions for any red flags that might emerge.
It sounds like a demanding and high-pressure job,
It is.
but clearly it's an essential one in the fight against nesting.
It absolutely is.
Okay.
And one of the key weapons in their arsenal is knowledge.
You mean understanding the intricacies of nesting schemes and how they operate?
Precisely.
Okay.
The more knowledgeable compliance officers are,
Yeah.
the better equipped they'll be to identify potential red flags and take appropriate action.
So it's about constantly staying ahead of the curve,
Yeah.
learning about new trends and tactics being used by those seeking to exploit the system.
Exactly.
Got it.
And that brings us to another critical element in preventing nesting:
Okay, what's that?
training.
You mean educating staff within financial institutions?
Yes.
About the risks and how to spot suspicious activity?
Yes. And not just compliance officers.
Right.
Everyone, from the CEO down to the teller, needs to understand the importance of vigilance and ethical conduct.
Creating a culture of compliance where everyone feels empowered to speak up if something seems amiss.
Exactly. Because ultimately, the fight against nesting is a collective effort.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive so far.
It has been.
We've covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
but I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
We are indeed.
Yeah.
There are so many fascinating layers to this issue,
Right.
and we haven't even begun to explore the broader implications for the global financial system.
I know. I'm excited to keep going.
Me too.
You know, it's fascinating how nesting highlights this fundamental tension in the financial world.
Yeah.
On one hand,
Mm-hmm.
we want to streamline transactions,
Right.
make them as seamless as possible for businesses and individuals operating globally.
Sure.
But that very efficiency can be exploited if we don't have robust safeguards in place.
It's a delicate balance.
Right.
And one that policymakers and regulators are constantly grappling with.
Yeah, how do we create a system
Exactly.
that facilitates legitimate financial activity
Yeah.
without inadvertently opening the door to abuse?
Tough question.
And it's not just about preventing criminal activity, right?
Right.
There are broader economic consequences to consider as well.
Absolutely.
Well,
When nesting occurs,
yeah.
it distorts the true picture of financial flows.
Okay.
Regulators might be operating under false assumptions about where money is coming from and where it's going.
Which could lead to misguided policies or
Exactly.
ineffective oversight.
Exactly.
Wow.
And if nesting leads to sanctions evasion or money laundering on a large scale, it can destabilize entire economies.
It's a ripple effect that can be felt far beyond the immediate players involved.
For sure.
So given all these risks,
Yeah.
are existing regulations and safeguards enough to tackle nesting?
That's a question that's being hotly debated in the financial community.
I bet.
Some argue that current regulations are sufficient if properly enforced.
Okay.
Others believe that new legislation is needed to specifically target nesting practices.
And it's not just about laws and regulations, is it?
No.
It also comes down to the culture within financial institutions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Fostering a culture of compliance is paramount.
Right.
It's not enough to simply have rules in place.
Mm-hmm.
You need to create an environment where employees understand the importance of ethical conduct,
Got it.
where they feel comfortable raising concerns,
Yeah.
and where they're empowered to speak up if they see something suspicious.
That makes me think about whistleblowers.
Mm,
They often play a crucial role in exposing these types of schemes.
they do indeed.
Yeah.
And creating a safe and supportive environment for whistleblowers is essential.
Right.
They should be encouraged, not punished, for bringing potential wrongdoing to light.
Speaking of real-world consequences,
Yeah.
one of the sources you sent mentioned a case where a bank was hit with massive fines for failing to prevent nesting. I think it was something like hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yes, that case was a stark reminder of the severe penalties that institutions can face if they're found to be complicit in nesting activities.
And it's not just about the financial hit.
Right.
There's also the reputational damage,
Absolutely.
right? Because once a bank is associated with nesting,
Yeah.
it can be incredibly difficult to regain the trust of customers, investors, and partners.
It can tarnish their brand and have long-lasting repercussions for their business.
It's a stark reminder that the stakes are incredibly high.
They are.
But I'm curious, from your experience,
Yeah.
what are some of the biggest challenges that compliance officers face when trying to detect and prevent nesting?
One of the biggest hurdles is the sheer complexity of financial transactions.
Right.
With the rise of globalization and new financial technologies, it's become increasingly difficult to track the flow of money across borders and institutions.
It's like trying to untangle a giant knot.
It is.
And it's not just about volume, right? It's
Yeah.
also about the sophistication of the techniques being used.
Precisely.
Right.
Those seeking to exploit the system are constantly innovating, finding new ways to obfuscate their activities and stay one step ahead of the authorities.
So it's a constant arms race.
It is.
As soon as you develop a new safeguard, someone's trying to figure out how to circumvent it.
That's the reality of the situation, unfortunately, which is why it's so crucial for compliance officers to be constantly learning, adapting, and sharing information with their peers.
It's about building a collective intelligence network
Yeah.
where everyone is pooling their knowledge and resources to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that requires collaboration, not just within institutions, but also across borders.
Right.
Nesting is a global problem that demands a global response.
That brings up a fascinating point.
Okay.
We've been talking about nesting from the perspective of regulators and financial institutions, but what about the role of everyday people?
Right.
What can individuals do to contribute to the fight against nesting?
You know, that's a really important question.
Yeah.
While it might seem like a problem that's too big for any one person to tackle,
Right.
individuals can actually play a significant role in raising awareness and promoting transparency.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Okay.
Tell me more.
First and foremost, it's about being informed.
Okay.
The more people understand the risks of nesting, the more likely they are to recognize red flags and report suspicious activity.
So educating ourselves about the issue
Yeah.
and sharing that knowledge with others.
Exactly. And it's not just about abstract concepts.
Right.
It's about being vigilant in our own financial dealings. Do your due diligence before engaging with a new financial institution.
Got it.
Ask questions about their compliance procedures. If something seems off,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to speak up.
It's about being an empowered consumer,
Yes.
not just passively accepting whatever information is presented to us.
Precisely.
Okay.
And if you do come across something that seems suspicious,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to report it to the appropriate authorities.
Right.
You might think that your one report won't make a difference,
Yeah.
but it could be the missing piece of the puzzle that helps to uncover a larger scheme.
It's like that old saying, if you see something, say something.
Exactly.
Right.
And don't underestimate the power of collective action.
Oh.
Support organizations and initiatives that are working to combat financial crime and promote transparency in the financial sector.
Every voice counts.
Yeah.
And by working together,
Yeah.
we can create a more robust and resilient financial system.
We can.
But, as we've been discussing nesting,
Yeah.
it's made me realize that there's this inherent paradox in the financial world.
Okay.
On the one hand,
Yeah.
we want to make transactions as frictionless as possible.
Right.
But on the other hand,
Uh-huh.
we need to be incredibly cautious to prevent abuse.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of the challenge we're facing.
Right. How do we reconcile the need for security with the desire for efficiency?
Yeah.
How do we create a system that is both open and secure?
Tough question.
It's a tough question with no easy answers.
No.
But I think part of the solution lies in technology.
I agree.
Yeah.
Technology has the potential to play a transformative role in the fight against nesting.
Okay.
We're already seeing the emergence of new tools and techniques
Yeah.
that can help us to better track financial flows, identify suspicious patterns,
Okay.
and automate compliance processes.
For example, artificial intelligence and machine learning are being used to analyze vast amounts of data and flag potential red flags that might otherwise go unnoticed.
Exactly. And these technologies are constantly evolving,
Yeah.
becoming more sophisticated and effective over time.
Right.
But technology alone is not a silver bullet.
Got it.
It needs to be combined with human intelligence, strong regulatory frameworks, and a culture of compliance within financial institutions.
It's a multifaceted approach
Yeah,
that requires collaboration across all sectors and stakeholders.
absolutely.
Right.
And it's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
The fight against nesting is a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
We need to be constantly vigilant,
Hmm.
adapting to new threats, and finding creative solutions.
This deep dive has been incredibly enlightening,
Yeah.
but it's also raised a lot of questions in my mind.
Okay.
For example, what are some of the emerging trends in nesting?
Right.
How are those seeking to exploit the system adapting to new technologies and regulations?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to one of the most concerning trends we're seeing, the rise of virtual currencies and decentralized finance.
Virtual currencies. That's a whole other layer of complexity.
It is.
I can see how they could be a breeding ground for nesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With their decentralized nature and often anonymous transactions,
Right.
virtual currencies can offer a convenient way to obscure the flow of funds.
Yeah.
It's like trying to track ghosts moving money through a digital fog.
And I imagine that makes it even harder for regulators and compliance officers to keep up.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
The regulatory landscape for virtual currencies is still evolving,
Okay.
and there are many jurisdictions where the rules are unclear or enforcement is lagging.
Right.
This creates opportunities for those seeking to exploit the system for illicit purposes,
Including nesting.
including nesting.
So it's like the Wild West of finance in some ways.
In some ways, yes.
Yeah.
But just like with traditional finance,
Mm.
it's important to remember that not all activity in the virtual currency space is nefarious.
Okay.
There are many legitimate uses for these technologies. Right.
And there are individuals and companies working hard to promote responsible innovation and build a more transparent ecosystem.
That's reassuring to hear. But given the challenges we've been discussing, it seems like the fight against nesting is going to be a long and difficult one.
It will be.
Yeah.
But it's a fight worth having.
Right.
The stakes are simply too high.
Yeah.
We need to protect the integrity of the financial system, prevent illicit activities,
Right.
and ensure a level playing field for all participants.
And as we've discussed, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach.
Absolutely.
Right.
We need strong regulations,
Okay.
robust enforcement mechanisms,
Yeah.
cutting-edge technology,
Yeah.
and a culture of compliance within financial institutions.
Mhm.
But perhaps most importantly,
Okay.
we need global cooperation and information sharing.
Right.
Nesting is a transnational problem that requires a transnational response.
That makes me think back to what you said earlier
Right.
about the role of individuals in this fight.
Yeah.
Even though it can feel overwhelming,
Mm,
we all have a part to play.
we do indeed.
Yeah.
As individuals, we can educate ourselves about the risks of nesting,
Mm.
be vigilant in our own financial dealings,
Mm-hmm.
and report any suspicious activity to the appropriate authorities.
Right.
We can support organizations that are working to combat financial crime and promote transparency.
Yeah.
And we can demand accountability from our elected officials and the institutions that serve us.
It's about recognizing that we're all stakeholders in the financial system, and we all have a responsibility to protect it.
Precisely.
Yeah,
The fight against nesting might be complex and multifaceted,
it is.
but at its core, it's about something very simple:
What's that?
upholding integrity, fairness, and accountability in the financial world.
Well said.
Thank you.
This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening.
It has.
A huge thanks to our expert for guiding us through this intricate and often shadowy world.
Happy to be here. And to you, our listener, we hope this has equipped you with a better understanding of the hidden thread of nesting.
Yes,
Remember, knowledge is power.
it is.
And by staying informed and engaged, we can all contribute to a more transparent and resilient financial system.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep diving deep.